Hello to everyone
Bonjour
from
à tous
WHO
et à
headquarters
tous.
here in
Depuis le
Geneva. My name
siège de
is
l'OMS
Tariq
à
and we
Genève, je
welcome
m'appelle
you
Tariq, je vous souhaite la
for our
bienvenue
regular
à
press
l'occasion
briefing
de
on
notre
COVID-19.
conférence de presse régulière sur COVID-19.
Today, as we
Aujourd'hui,
had previous
comme
days, we have simultaneous interpretation
les dernières
to
fois, nous
6 UN
proposons
languages
l'interprétation
plus
vers les 6 langues
Portuguese,
et
and I
des
would like
Nations
to
Unies, plus le
take this
portugais.
opportunity to thank
Donc je saisis
interpreters
l'occasion
who
qui
are
m'est donnée pour
here with
remercier les
us and who will help
interprètes qui sont
have the
ici
information
avec
interpreted
nous
in
et qui
those
vont
languages.
interpréter vers les
We also
différentes
have
langues que je
sent
viens de
a
citer. Nous
number
avons
of
également
documents
envoyé un
from
certain
our regional
nombre de
offices as
documents
well
de nos
as
bureaux
invitation
régionaux ainsi que des
to press
invitations
briefings from
aux
our regional
séances de
colleagues
presse
that
à
you
nos
may
collègues
wish to
régionaux que
follow.
vous souhaiterez
Today we
peut-être
have
suivre.
Dr.
Aujourd'hui,
Tedros,
le
WHO General,
docteur Tedros,
Dr. Maria
directeur
Van
général,
Kerkhove, and
est
Dr.
présent, le
Mike
docteur Maria
Ryan
Van
with us,
Kerkhove et
and I
le
will give
docteur
floor
Ryan.
immediately
Je vais sans plus
to
attendre
Dr.
donner la
Tedros
parole au
before
docteur
we
Tedros
open the
avant
floor to questions. Dr.
que
Tedros, please.
l'on ne prenne vos questions. Je vous en prie, docteur Tedros.
Thank you, Tariq.
Merci Tariq.
Good morning,
Bonjour
good afternoon, and good evening.
ou bonsoir.
As of tomorrow, it will be 3
Demain,
months
ça fera
since
3
I
mois
declared the
depuis
public
que
health
j'ai
emergency
déclaré une
of international
urgence
concern
de santé
over
publique
the
de
outbreak
portée
of novel
internationale
coronavirus.
due à
Today,
la flambée
I would like to
de
take a
ce
few moments
nouveau
to look
coronavirus.
back at the
Aujourd'hui,
period
j'aimerais
preceding
prendre
that
quelques instants
announcement
pour
to be clear about
faire le point
what WHO
sur la
knew
période qui a précédé
and
cette
what
annonce
we did,
pour
which could help
expliquer
the country to
clairement ce que
understand
savait l'OMS et ce que nous
the
avons fait
3
pour que les pays
months.
comprennent
On the
ces
31st
3
of
mois.
December,
Le 31 décembre,
WHO's epidemic intelligence system
le
picked
système
up
de
a report
renseignement sur
about a
les
cluster
épidémies de
of cases
l'OMS
of
a
pneumonia
eu un
of
rapport
unknown
sur un
cause
foyer de
in
cas de
Wuhan,
pneumonie de
China.
cause inconnue à Wuhan, en
The
Chine.
following day,
Le jour
New
suivant,
Year's Day,
le
WHO
jour du
asked
Nouvel
China
An,
for more
l'OMS
information
a demandé
under
à la
the
Chine davantage
international health
d'informations
regulations
sur
and
le
activated our
RSI et
incident
a
management support team
déclenché
to
son
coordinate
une
the
équipe
response across headquarters and our
d'appui
regional
de gestion des
country
incidents pour
offices.
coordonner la riposte entre
On the
le
2nd of
siège et
January,
les bureaux régionaux et de
WHO
pays. Le
informed
2
the
janvier,
Global Outbreak
l'OMS
Alert and Response
a
Network, or
informé
GORN,
le GORN,
which
le
includes
réseau
more
de
than
riposte
160
et d'alerte
institutions
en
in more
cas
than
de
70
flambe mondiale qui
countries.
comprend plus de 250 institutions
Yesterday
dans plus de
was
70
GORN's
pays.
20th
Hier,
birthday,
c'était le 20e
and I would like
anniversaire
to use
du
this
réseau
opportunity
et
to
j'aimerais
say
saisir
happy
l'occasion qui
birthday
est
to
donnée pour
GORN
dire
and
bon
thank
anniversaire
you and
au
congratulations
réseau
to every
GORN
single
et
GORN member
félicitations à tous les membres
for
de
their
ce
commitment
réseau de
to
riposte
responding
d'alerte
to the
pour la
COVID-19
façon
pandemic and
dont ils ont
many other
riposté à la pandémie
emergencies.
et à beaucoup d'autres
Really
urgences.
proud work
Nous
with
sommes
you.
très fiers de travailler
On
à
the
vos
3rd
côtés.
of
Le
January,
3 janvier,
China
la
provided
Chine a
information
fourni
to
des
WHO through
informations
a
à
face-to-face
l'OMS
meeting in
lors
Beijing
d'une réunion
and through
présentielle à
WHO's
Beijing
event
et
information
par le
system
biais du
established under the
système
international health
d'information sur les événements
regulations.
et qui a été
On the
créé dans le
4th
cadre
of
du
January,
RSI. Le
WHO
4 janvier,
reported the
l'OMS
cluster of cases
a
on Twitter.
présenté
At the
un
stage,
rapport sur le
models were
foyer de cas
reported.
sur Twitter.
On the 5th
À
of
ce stade,
January,
il n'y a encore aucun
WHO
décès
shared detailed
enregistré. Le
technical
5 janvier,
information through its
l'OMS a
event
donné des
information
informations
system.
techniques détaillées par le
This
biais de son
included
système
advice all member
d'information sur
states
les
and
événements.
IHR
Il y avait
contact
notamment
points
des conseils à
to
tous
take
les États membres et aux
precautions
points
to
de
reduce
contact
the
du
risk of
RSI.
acute respiratory
Il s'agissait de prendre
infections.
des précautions pour réduire le risque
Providing
d'infection
guidance
respiratoire
on the
aiguë.
basis
On a
that there
également
could be
indiqué
human-to-human
qu'il pourrait y
transmission.
avoir une transmission
On the same day,
humain à humain. Le
WHO
même
also
jour,
issued its first
l'OMS
public disease
a
outbreak news,
publié sa première
publishing technical
notice
information for the scientific
de
and
flambée de
public
la
health
maladie
communities,
en
as
publiant
well
des
as
informations
the
techniques à
world's
l'intention des communautés
On
scientifiques et de
10th
santé
and
publique,
11th of
ainsi
January,
qu'à l'intention des médias du
WHO
monde entier.
published
Les
a
10 et 11
comprehensive
janvier,
package of
l'OMS
guidance
a publié
on
toute
how
une
to
série
detect, test for,
complète
and manage cases, and
d'orientation
protect
et
health
de
workers from
directives sur
potential
la
human-to-human
manière de
transmission.
détecter, de
Based on our
tester
previous
et de gérer les
experience
cas
with
et de protéger
coronavirus,
les agents de santé d'une transmission d'homme
published
à homme.
ready
C'est d'ailleurs
We
comme cela
report.
que cela se passe.
We
Nous
post countries reports as is.
mettons en ligne les rapports des pays
However,
tels qu'ils
earlier
nous
the same
parviennent.
day,
Cependant, plus
WHO
tôt le
held
même
a
jour,
press briefing at
l'OMS
which
a
we said
organisé une
that
conférence de
based
presse
on
au
our
cours de
past
laquelle nous avons dit
experience,
qu'à la lumière de notre
coronaviruses,
expérience passée avec le
human-human
coronavirus,
transmission
la
was likely.
transmission d'être humain à être humain
And our
était
senior
probable.
experts participated in
Et
that press conference.
nos spécialistes,
And that news was carried by
principaux
major media.
experts, ont
On
participé
the
à cette conférence
20th
de
and
presse et l'ont
21st of
confirmé.
January,
Les 20 et
WHO staff
21
visited
janvier,
Wuhan.
le personnel de l'OMS est
On
rendu à
the
Wuhan
22nd,
et le 22
reported that
janvier
the
a
evidence
indiqué que
suggested
les
human-to-human transmission was
données
occurring.
permettant
On
d'indiquer qu'il y avait une
22nd
transmission
and
d'humain à
23rd
humain
of January,
étaient présentes. Les
I
22 et
convened
23
the
janvier,
emergency
j'ai
committee
convoqué
consisting
le
of
comité
10
d'urgence
independent experts
composé
from
de
around
15
the
experts
world.
indépendants du monde entier.
At the time,
À cette époque,
581 cases
581
had been
cas
reported
avaient été
and
notifiés,
only 10 cases
seulement
outside China.
10 en dehors de la Chine.
The emergency
Le
committee was
comité
divided
des
in its
situations
opinion.
d'urgence
It
n'a
did
pas
not advise
réussi
that I declare
à
a
parler
public
d'une
health
seule
emergency
voix
of international
et
concern.
n'a conseillé que je
The committee
déclare
asked
une
to convene
urgence de santé
in 10
publique de
days
portée internationale.
or
Le
less
comité
to
a
allow
demandé à
time
être
for more
reconvoqué en 10
information and
jours,
evidence
voire
to be
moins,
collected and
pour
considered.
à nouveau examiner les
On the
données probantes. Le
27th of January,
27 janvier,
I
je me
traveled
suis
to
rendu
Beijing
à
with
Beijing,
WHO's chief of
accompagné
emergencies,
des
Dr. Mike Ryan,
responsables des
and
situations
other senior
d'urgence,
WHO
Dr.
staff,
Mike Ryan et
and met
autres
with President
responsables
Xi
de l'OMS.
Jinping
J'ai
and other
rencontré le
leaders
président Xi
to learn
Jinping
more
et
about
d'autres
the
dirigeants
response and offer
pour
WHO's
savoir
assistance.
ce qu'il en était de la riposte et
We
proposer
discussed
l'aide de
the
l'OMS.
seriousness of the
Nous
situation
avons parlé de la
and agreed
gravité de
that
la
an
situation
international team of
et
scientists
nous avons
should travel to
convenu
China
qu'une
to look
équipe
into the
internationale
outbreak
scientifique se
and the
rendrait
response,
en
including
Chine pour
experts
examiner
from China,
cette flambée et la riposte.
Germany,
Il y aurait notamment des experts
Japan,
de Chine, d'Allemagne, de
the Republic
Japon,
of
de
Korea,
République de Corée,
Nigeria,
du Nigeria,
the Russian
de
Federation,
Fédération de Russie, de
Singapore,
Singapour
and the
et
United
des
States
États-Unis
of America.
d'Amérique.
On the 30th of
Le
January,
30 janvier,
I reconvened the
j'ai
emergency
convoqué à
committee.
nouveau le comité
And
des
after
situations
receiving their
d'urgence
advice,
et après avoir entendu leur
because of
avis
the new information they gathered, they had a
basé sur les
consensus.
nouvelles informations
I
reçues
declare global
et un
public health
consensus était
emergency.
dégagé. J'ai déclaré
WHO's
une
highest
urgence de
level
santé publique
of
de portée
alarm.
internationale, ce qui est l'alarme
At
de
the
plus
time,
haut niveau.
As you may remember,
À l'époque, vous
there
vous en
were
souviendrez sans
less
doute,
than
il y avait
100
moins de
cases
100
and
cas
deaths outside
et
China.
aucun décès en dehors
To be
de la
specific,
Chine.
We had
Pour
82
être
cases
plus précis, nous avions 82
outside
cas
China.
en dehors de la Chine
and no death.
et aucun décès
When we
enregistré.
declared the
Lorsque
highest
nous avons
level of
déclaré, déclenché
emergency.
le niveau le plus élevé
From the beginning,
d'urgence de santé
WHO has
publique. Dès
acted
le
quickly
début, l'OMS
decisively to
a
respond
agi
and
rapidement
to
et
warn
de
the
façon
world.
ferme pour
We sounded
prévenir
the alarm early.
le monde entier.
And
Nous
we
avons
sounded
tiré
it often.
la sonnette d'alarme, nous l'avons fait à de nombreuses
We said
reprises.
repeatedly
Nous
that the
avons
world had
dit
a window of opportunity
très
to
souvent
prepare and to
que le
prevent
monde avait la
widespread community
possibilité de se
transmission.
préparer et de se prémunir
We started our
contre
early press
l'épidémie.
conference.
Nous avons commencé très tôt à
People were saying,
organiser des
you know,
conférences
the
de
world would
presse.
be tired of you if you're
On nous a dit, bon,
making a press
vous allez
conference every day.
lasser si vous faites
But
une
we
conférence de
didn't mind.
presse
We wanted
tous les jours, mais nous
to
n'avons
make sure
pas
that the
écouté
world
cela.
understands
Nous
what
avons
we're saying.
souhaité que le monde comprenne ce que notre
WHO is
message.
committed to transparency
L'OMS
and
a à
accountability.
cœur la transparence et la
In accordance
responsabilisation.
with the international health
Conformément
regulations,
au règlement
I will
sanitaire
convene the
international,
emergency committee tomorrow.
je vais convoquer le
Because it's
comité des
almost 3
situations
months
d'urgence
since
demain, parce que cela
we
fera
declared
3 mois que nous aurons
the highest
déclaré
emergency, and that was what was
cette
suggested by the
urgence
emergency
de santé
committee to
publique de
reconvene
portée
3 months
internationale
in
et le comité
after the
doit se
declaration
réunir 3 mois
to
après
evaluate
la
the
déclaration
evolution
pour
of the
évaluer
pandemic
l'évolution de
and
la
advise
pandémie
on
et
updated recommendations.
Fournir des
In
recommandations
the
à
3
jour.
months since the
Dans,
emergency committee last met,
Au cours des 3 mois
WHO
de
has
la
worked
dernière réunion
day
du comité
in,
de situation
day
d'urgence,
out
l'OMS
to
a
sound the
travaillé
alarm,
sans relâche pour
support
tirer
countries,
la sonnette d'alarme,
and
pour
save
aider les
lives.
pays et sauver des vies.
We have worked with
Nous
countries
avons
to help
travaillé
them
aux côtés
prepare
des
and
pays pour
respond.
les aider à se préparer
We
et
have
à
brought
riposter.
countries together to
Nous
share
avons
experiences and
regroupé,
lessons learned.
rassemblé les pays
We
pour
have
qu'ils
brought
partagent
together
leurs
thousands
expériences
of
et les
experts
enseignements
to
tirés.
analyze
Nous
the
avons fait
evolving
travailler
evidence
ensemble
and
des milliers
distill
d'experts pour qu'ils
distill
analysent
it
les données
into
probantes en
guidance.
évolution et pour
We have
qu'ils
convened researchers to
proposent
identify priorities
des
from all over the
conseils et des
world.
orientations. Nous avons
We have launched
fait
a
appel
large
à des
international
chercheurs pour
trial
qu'ils identifient les
to find
priorités.
answers
Nous avons
fast about which
lancé
drugs
également
are
un
the most
essai
effective.
international à grande échelle pour trouver des
We have brought
réponses
together a
sur
consortium of countries and partners to accelerate the
pour
development,
accélérer
equitable
la mise
distribution
au
of
point et la
vaccines,
distribution
diagnostics
équitable
and
de
therapeutics.
vaccins, de médicaments
We have
et de
shipped
traitements. Nous
millions
avons
of
envoyé
test
des
kits
millions
and
de
tons
kits
of
de tests
protective
et
gear
des tonnes
all around the world,
de
focusing on
protection,
those countries who need
d'équipements
our
de protection
support
personnelle dans
most.
le monde entier et dans les pays surtout
We
qui en
have
avaient le
trained
plus besoin.
more
Nous avons
than 2
formé
million
plus
health workers, to be
de
exact,
2 millions
2.3
de
million
travailleurs
health
de
workers around the
santé,
world.
pour être exact 2,3
Don't
millions
think
d'agents de
that's
santé.
enough. We will continue to
Mais
train
ce
more.
n'est pas suffisant.
We have worked with tech companies to fight the epidemic. We have kept the world informed in multiple ways, including these regular press conferences answering your questions. We have brought together entertainers to provide music and laughter, even in these dark times. Using this opportunity to thank Hugh Evans, my friend from Global Citizen, and Lady Gaga for bringing the whole world together. And we have watched with admiration that the world has come together in solidarity to fight this common enemy. We share the grief and pain of so many people around the world, and we share the hope that we will overcome this pandemic together. There is one thing we haven't done. We haven't given up, and we will not give up. We won't. Our commitment remains to serving all the people of the world with science, solidarity, and solutions, but above all, with humility and respect to all people and nations. WHO is now working to provide the critical strategies, solutions, and supplies that countries will need in the coming weeks and months. One thing that we would ask is unity at the national level and solidarity at the global level. More than ever, the human race, humanity, should stand together to defeat this virus. I have said it before, this virus can wreak havoc. It's more than any terrorist attack. Said it before. It can bring political, economic, and social upheavals. But the choice is ours, and the choice should be unity at national level. The choice should be global solidarity, standing in unison. The choice should be humanity against this virus. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros, for these opening remarks. Before we open the floor for questions, just to remind everyone that we have simultaneous interpretation into 6 UN languages, and that's Russian, English, French, Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, and we also have Portuguese. For journalists who are watching us on Zoom, you have to click on interpretation, and then there is just one little thing that Arabic is under Korean. So I don't know really why is that, but if you want to listen in Arabic, you have to click on Korean. So if that's okay, we'll ask everyone to be very short, have one question, so we try to take as many as possible. So if we may start, also just remind you that we cannot unmute you, so if we call on you, please unmute yourself and you will be able to ask questions. So we will start with Kazakhstan, with Janat Ahmetova from TV channel Habar. Janat, can you hear us?
Yes, good evening. My name is Janat Ernst. I'm a correspondent of agency Habar. My question is, in the framework of regional cooperation, Kazakhstan has provided humanitarian assistance in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic to Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. Several countries provided such assistance to Kazakhstan. How is such a partnership built in other regions of the world, and how does this correlate with WHO's work in this direction? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, and again, thank you to Kazakhstan for the help you're providing in the region and the assistance you're getting from others. I think we've seen in this pandemic that very often, it doesn't matter what level you're at, the most effective and welcome assistance comes from your neighbours. Maybe the house next door, but sometimes it's the country next door. Neighbouring countries share very often common people, common languages, common cultures, a common approach to the world, and usually have very deep rooted connections between countries. And those trusting relationships in situations like this can be relied upon to allow for assistance, support and solidarity to move between countries. I also believe it's a pathway through the pandemic as countries who are close to each other, have those direct links, can begin to open and trade and work with each other in a careful and stepwise manner. So having good neighbours is always a very positive thing. Also, I believe across the whole sub-region, from Turkey all the way through to Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, the Turkic-speaking nations have worked together very effectively in providing mutual support. Sub-regional and regional collaboration and coordination is very important. Director General Dr. Tedros has worked with our regional directors and so many of the regional collections of ministers and governments, with ASEAN, with the African Union, with the CARICOM, with so many other regional integration organisations which provide a basis for cooperation and support between countries. So yes, I do think that local support in sub-regions, regional coordination, both in terms of aligning response strategies, aligning exit strategies from lockdown, aligning innovation strategies, and working our way through this pandemic to reach a point where we have enough control to be able to resume our social and economic lives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan, for this answer for Habar TV news channel from Kazakhstan. Next question comes from Globo Brazil. That's Bianca Gauthier. Bianca, can you hear us, please?
Yes, Tarek, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. My question is about Brazil, and so I will ask in Portuguese. Ao ser questionado sobre o número de mortes no Brasil, que já passou o número da China, o presidente Jair Bolsonaro respondeu, e daí, so what, em inglês. Ele disse que não pode fazer milagres, milagres a gente sabe que não, mas eu gostaria de saber do Dr. Tedros se, além do que já tem sido feito, há mais que o Brasil deveria fazer no combate à Covid-19, o que ainda falta, o que ainda precisa ser feito?
Bianca, can you please repeat the question, because Dr. Tedros was not able to hear everything. Can you just repeat slowly, please?
Do you prefer in English?
Dr. Tedros, it's number 2 channel. Okay, please just repeat in Portuguese, it's okay, thank you.
Ok. Quando foi questionado sobre o número de mortes no Brasil, que já é um número superior ao número da China, o presidente Jair Bolsonaro respondeu, e daí? ele disse que não pode fazer milagres. Eu gostaria de saber do Dr. Tedros o que o Brasil ainda precisa fazer no combate à Covid-19, além do que já tem feito.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You know, there was a question asked from Brazil, when was it? Last Monday. And I was informed that the newspapers in Brazil actually carried something I never said. Maybe out of, what do you call it? Out of perspective. The response I had was a response how all countries should actually do. And to be honest, even now, from the information you're giving me, I would not comment on what the President said without checking what he really said. So that's what I would like to say. And we're talking to Brazil on a regular basis. So if they have questions or if they have issues, they can talk to us. And if there is any comment that's made, we would like to hear it directly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros. Now we will go to Simon Ateb from TV News Channel Africa. Simon, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Simon Ateba from Today News Africa in Washington, D.C. My question is on testing in Africa. Dr. Tedros, as you know, in most part of Africa, testing remains extremely inadequate in most part of Africa. For instance, Nigeria has almost 200 million people, but only 11,000 tests have been done so far. And the trend seems to be the same in other countries in Africa. I was wondering if you could expand again on all the ongoing effort the WHO is doing to expand testing in Africa. And if I may add quickly to Dr. Maria, I know the DG mentioned recently that you were having a partnership with tech companies. I was wondering if you could clarify in detail what type of personal private health information you are giving tech company and how long can they store that private personal information? Thank you.
The DG may want to respond on broader capacities in Africa, but in terms of laboratory testing capacity, I think led by the Institut Pasteur in Senegal, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases in South Africa, and working with ourselves and the African Union and the Africa CDC, the capacity for both the laboratory technicians to do the testing and the distribution of tests has occurred across Africa. I do agree with you, Simon, that the availability of tests is still a critical issue, as it is in many parts of the world. And I can assure you that we have recently effected deliveries of personal protective equipment, more testing and test kits to 51 countries on the African continent. Those flights were just completed this week. But over the coming few weeks, there will be a huge scale-up in terms of automated tests, manual tests, swabs and media and all of the other material needed for testing right across low and middle-income countries and within about 140 priority countries. And in fact, I think all countries in sub-Saharan Africa are included as part of that priority list. And we will be procuring and shipping over 5 million manual test kits for those countries. So there will be, and this is under the supply chain task force that the Director General kicked off in the last number of weeks with the UN Secretary General. And we've been working on supply chain management now for months, but bringing together the architecture of identifying supply in the global supply chain that's essentially broken validating those test kits that were available, scaling up the production of those test kits at the manufacturers, procuring those kits and arranging for them to be transported to countries, along with PPE, along with the other supplies, along with the swabs and the media, has been a challenge. And we'd like to thank our partners out there, those who've worked with us on procurement, like UNICEF, like the Global Fund, like UNIAID, many, many others, the Gates Foundation, and those partners who are working with us on allocation and distribution, like the World Food Programme, and I forgot to mention our colleagues at the Clinton Access Initiative as well. So we've seen a coming together of a global consortium of institutions and organisations who are fundamentally focused on ensuring that we fill the gaps in the supply chain, especially in low and middle income countries and especially in countries affected by fragility and conflict. We intend to fill a significant proportion of that gap in the coming weeks and months, and be a reliable source of PPE, of testing capacity and equipment and supplies, as well as other medical supplies and ventilators to countries and populations all over the world. We are doing and striving our best to identify the funding and transport mechanisms and the way to guarantee those supplies. Might I say, in the context of a very, very broken global supply chain, where production, procurement, distribution is extremely difficult, and again, would like to thank our partners for that. With regard to, we have a lot of collaboration with the private sector and with the IT sector on our work, both to protect our systems here in Geneva and around the world, but also on developing solutions for the field and developing solutions for public health. I can assure you that there is no personal data being held by private sector companies on any of the elements to do with COVID-19 or anything else for that matter. So just to reassure you that we are not passing personal data to private companies of any kind, especially to IT companies on this issue, and all of our data sharing is within our data protection and ethical considerations that pertain. So just to reassure you on that.
So on the our partnership with tech companies, the partnership we started is mainly to fight infodemic. So if it's because of the recent discussions and agreements we had with them, it's about fighting infodemics and it's not about sharing data. But as Mike said, we take private information very seriously. But the agreement we had recently is not about that. It's about fighting infodemics together and routing all those who have questions about coronavirus to the right site or to the right agency, meaning to WHO and other reliable agencies. And they're doing that. Facebook is doing that. Google is doing that. And other tech industries are doing that and directing any questions to the right institutions. But at the same time, when there is misinformation or fake news, they remove it immediately. So that's where we're focused now in our partnership with them.
Thank you very much for this. And now we will go to NHK, Japanese news agency. Shoko, can you hear us, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. So some countries are reporting a possible link between COVID-19 and Kawasaki disease. What's the position of WHO on this issue? Thank you.
Mary, may I supplement? You want to go? Yeah, please. Sorry, I thought you were just...
No. So yes, I'll start. Maybe Mike would like to supplement. So yes, we are aware of this report, which came out of the United Kingdom, about a small number of cases amongst children with its inflammatory response. We're looking at this with our clinical network, and in fact, our clinical network had a teleconference yesterday which discussed this. And if I can remind you, we have a global network of clinicians that are dealing directly with COVID-19 patients across the globe, and they meet at least once a week, if not more, to exchange information. And what they're doing is trying to better understand how this infection affects the body and the disease that it causes. So we do know so far with regards to children that continuing in our understanding of this, that data from this disease in children, they tend to have less severe disease, so they tend to have overwhelmingly mild disease. There are some children who have developed severe disease and some children who have died. There are some recent rare descriptions of children in some European countries that have had this inflammatory syndrome, which is similar to the Kawasaki Syndrome, but it seems to be very rare. What we've asked for is for the global network of clinicians to be on alert for this and to ensure that they capture information on children systematically so that we could better understand what is occurring in children and so that we could better improve our understanding and guide treatment. But it seems to be very rare, only in maybe 1 or 2 countries so far, and in a number of countries, and additional countries, they have not reported this yet, but this is something that the clinical network is looking into specifically.
I just may supplement and emphasise for all parents out there that the vast majority of children who get COVID-19 will have a mild infection and recover completely. And Kawasaki Syndrome is a syndrome that's been around for a long time. It's a rare condition. It happens. It usually resolves itself. It is associated with inflammatory processes in the blood vessels, and something that we're very grateful to the clinicians who've observed this in children. But they have said this is an atypical Kawasaki syndrome. They're describing something they have seen in children. It's a very important observation. And it may reflect, too, as we've seen in adults, the fact that the SARS-CoV-2 virus causing COVID-19, obviously is causing inflammation and attacks tissue other than lung tissue. And we are in a situation where clinicians are looking at what those other effects of having this coronavirus infection are. And we've seen this in the past. Many emerging diseases, they don't necessarily only attack one type of tissue. There can be multiple organs affected, and many of you have seen the reports of other organs that have been affected with this disease. So it's really important that this information is shared around the world. It's really important that paediatricians and clinicians get time to collect information and share that. But again, just to reassure parents out there, this is a rare complication, and we should always be watchful in children who are experiencing infectious disease for any deterioration in their condition. But I think it's important that parents out there are reassured.
Thank you for this. Now we will go to Reuters and Stephanie. Stephanie, can you hear us? One more time, Stephanie from Reuters, can you hear us? You need to unmute yourself.
Yep. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, I wondered if perhaps Mike could comment on some of these reports on remdesivir that have come out. There's some indications in the Lancet that it's not been that effective. The company is saying that it's helped improve outcomes for patients, and given some data that they say is encouraging. I wondered if you could help us on that. It's still all coming out, of course.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. No, I wouldn't like to make any specific comment on that because I haven't read those publications in detail. It's always very important that we consider all publications related, and it can sometimes take a number of publications to determine what the ultimate impact of a drug is. And clearly we have the randomised control trials that are underway both in the UK, the US, and on the Solidarity trial with WHO. And remdesivir, I think, is one of the drugs under observation in many of those trials. So I think a lot more data will come out. We're all hoping and fervently hoping that one or more of the treatment currently under observation and under trial will result in altering clinical outcomes, improving clinical outcomes, and in ensuring that less people die or that less people have a severe course of illness. But I wouldn't like to make any comment. Maria, you may have read the papers, or we like to look at papers not just as one paper. We like to look at a group of publications and then be able to compare and use our clinical networks in order to do a proper review. We have a scientific review process in-house where we do systematic reviews at various times on different aspects of response, especially in drug efficacy and the efficacy of other interventions. And we would like to look at that in the context of a broader look at the overall data regarding remdesivir. But we are hopeful that this drug and others may prove to be helpful in treating COVID-19. Maria?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So it's a great question, and it's a good opportunity to explain a little bit about how we actually evaluate the evidence. So there are studies that are coming up, particularly on therapeutics, but in all aspects of this novel coronavirus and the new coronavirus causing this pandemic. And it's something within the scientific community. What we try to do when we evaluate the evidence is we look at what we call the weight of the evidence, where we pull together all available evidence, all available studies on any particular topic, whether these studies are conducted in a laboratory, through experimental conditions, whether they're done in observational studies or epidemiologic studies in people, whether these are done through clinical trials. And what we do is we pull together every shred of evidence, every piece of evidence we can get our hands on, and we review it and we critique it. And in this particular pandemic, we have a large volume of papers that are being shared with us prior to publication. These are the pre-publication materials. And this is amazing. This is such a positive aspect of this pandemic, and we thank all researchers who are willing to do that with us. But it is an important process for papers to go through what we call a peer-reviewed process, which means they submit a paper to a journal, and then they have top experts in that field really go through in detail and review that article. And then it goes back to the authors, and they modify it, and then they resubmit. So oftentimes, when you submit a paper, by the time it goes through the peer-reviewed process, it actually looks a lot different when it actually is published in a journal. And for us, we're trying to digest all of the information that comes to us that are pre-publication, and also the ones that are coming out in peer-reviewed journals. Once we do that, we look at all of the studies, and we judge them in the sense of this is a better study, this is more robust, and this study has some significant limitations. Once we're able to take that collectively, we can come away with some kind of a conclusion of, yes, we see an effect, no, we don't. Yes, we know more about this disease in children, or something about transmission, or whatever the topic may be. And then we go one step beyond that. Then we debate these results with our global expert networks. And this is a healthy debate. It's a constructive debate where we actually look again and we say, what does this tell us? And what does this mean in terms of our guidance to our member states, to all people all over the world? And that's a really important process to go through. That can be sped up, especially in emergencies when we need to do this very quickly, but it doesn't change our willingness and our desire to do this very comprehensively. Right now, what we are doing at WHO is we're working with our science division and we're working with partners at GORN who are conducting living reviews for us. So every day we are looking at publications that come out in the peer-reviewed journals and the publications that are being sent to us before they reach the journals, and we're conducting living reviews on about 30 topics right now, so that we can stay in tune with what is coming out. So typically you don't have one study that will come out that will be a game changer. There could be, if it's a very well-designed study, if there's enough cases and controls, it could really change understanding. And if that happens, we will adjust our guidance. But there is a process for this to take place, and we're really grateful for all of the scientists and experts that work with us to help us develop this guidance and understand all of this research that's coming out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bankirkov. Next question is for Gunilla van Hall from Swedish media. Gunilla, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. My question is on Sweden. It's a country that chosen a different road strategy, basically no lockdown and an open society through the crisis. Could this mean that the population of Sweden, maybe other countries that have not had strict lockdowns, have a chance to be better protected in case of a second wave, as they have been more exposed and have had a chance to develop possible herd immunity? Thank you.
Thank you. I think two things here. I think there's a perception out there that Sweden has not put in place control measures and has just allowed the disease to spread. Nothing could be further from the truth. Sweden has put in place a very strong public health policy around physical distancing, around caring and protecting for people in long-term facilities and many other things. What it has done differently is it has very much relied on its relationship with its citizenry. The ability and willingness of citizens to implement physical distancing, to self-regulate, if you want to use that word. And in that sense, they've implemented public policy through that partnership with the population. They've been doing the testing, they've ramped up their capacity to do intensive care quite significantly, and their health system has always remained within its capacity to respond to the number of cases that they've been experiencing. Like many other countries in Europe, Sweden has experienced some many clusters of disease and long-term care facilities. That's unfortunately and tragically not a unique event in Europe. Many countries across Europe have experienced the same tragedies over the last number of months, and it's something that really needs to be looked at very carefully all over Europe. Even as the numbers go down, our elderly or older citizens are still dying in large numbers in many nursing homes and long-term care facilities. More needs to be done to protect and stop those clusters and prevent disease spread in those settings. With regard to this concept of herd immunity, I think we'll wait. I believe seroprevalence studies are underway in Sweden as well as many other countries, and Maria can speak to that because WHO, with our partners, have done a large review of all of the seroepidemiologic studies that are underway and some of the results that are available. But I would say that the general outcome, even areas of fairly intense transmission, the portion of people who have seroconverted or who have antibodies in their blood is actually quite low, which is a concern because it does mean the vast majority of people remain susceptible. So the chances of disease rebounding or returning is quite high, especially if control measures if control measures or lockdown type measures are released too quickly without being replaced by case finding, contact tracing, testing and strong community compliance. I think if we are to reach a new normal, I think in many ways Sweden represents a future model of, if we wish to get back to a society in which we don't have lockdowns, then society may need to adapt for a medium or potentially a long period of time in which our physical and social relationships with each other will have to be modulated by the presence of the virus. We will have to be aware of the virus present, and we will have to, as individuals and families and communities, do everything possible on a day-to-day basis to reduce the transmission of that virus. And that may mean adjusting the way we live our lives. And I think maybe in Sweden they're looking at how that is done in real time. So I think there may be lessons to learn from our colleagues in Sweden. But again, I wanted just to emphasise, Sweden has not avoided controlling COVID-19. It's taken a very strong strategic approach to controlling COVID-19 across all of the elements of society. What it has done differently is it really has trusted its own communities to implement that physical distancing. And that is something that remains to be seen whether that will be fully successful or not.
It could be a coincidence, but I actually received a letter from His Excellency the Prime Minister Stefan Löfven today, and he shared with me the strong measures they're taking. And tack så mycket, Your Excellency.
To supplement what Mike said around the herd immunity, right now we're tracking over 90 seroepidemiologic studies that are in various stages of development, whether the countries are just starting the process to implement or whether they're implementing them now. There are some papers, pre-publication papers that have come out that have suggested low seroprevalence, so low percentage of the people that they tested that actually have antibodies. Indicating if the tests that they use are reliable, indicates that a large proportion of the population remains susceptible to COVID-19. That means the virus has more room to move. And so it is important that these measures, we continue to adhere to these public health measures. I think we need to wait some time to have a better understanding of how well the serologic tests that are available work. For the studies that we are working with, for the countries that we are working with on seroepidemiology, we've advised them to store their samples in -20 freezers right now until we can give better indication of which tests are performing well, which serologic tests are performing well. But we do hope that we will have more information about the extent of infection in a number of countries across the globe, so we can really understand how far and wide this virus has spread.
Thank you very much. We will now go to Morocco, where we have Abdallah calling us from Morocco Media. Abdallah, can you hear us, please? Go ahead.
نعم.
Yes, please go ahead.
شكرا على أخذ هذا السؤال. السؤال هو ماذا تطور اللقاحات لدى المنظمة العالمية للصحة؟ وما نسبة ضمان توزيع العديد للقاح في الدول الأفريقية والدول النامية مع نقص التمويل الكافي؟ شكرا. شكرا.
Thank you, Abdallah.
Yeah. شكرا عبدالله. السلام عليكم. Vaccine development is one of the areas we have been actually following up from the start. And from the projections we have, it would take 12 to 18 months. And this was said actually 2 months ago. So it means 10 to 16 months from now. But as you also know, we have launched a new initiative last week. And the purpose of that initiative is to accelerate the development of vaccines, so to have it even earlier than the projected dates, but at the same time ensure access to the vaccine all over the world. So it has a combination of two objectives. One is accelerating development, and the second is ensuring access, so that everybody has access, the haves and the have-nots. And as you may remember, governments and the private sector, all agencies, relevant agencies participate in that launching. And there is a strong commitment from everybody to push this forward, to accelerate the development and also break the barriers to access and ensure access. And I hope, WHO hopes that, the two objectives will be met. But I know it will be very difficult. As WHO, we know that it will be difficult, but we don't believe that it's impossible. And one of the important things we need to do to accelerate the development and ensure access is the financing part. And as you may know, the European Union, the European Commission is hosting a pledging conference on May 4, and I would like to use this opportunity actually to do two things. One, to invite everybody to join in that pledging conference, because we need funding to accelerate and ensure access. But at the same time, I would like to use this opportunity to thank the European Commission in general and all its member states, but at the same time, specifically, to thank my sister, Dr. Ursula von der Leyen, for her leadership in the pledging conference. And I hope to see as many countries as possible, as many donors as possible, as many private sectors as possible, as many citizens as possible to support the European Commission's initiative that will help the whole world. That is being done based on the principle of solidarity that we have been talking about. And I'm glad that the European Commission is delivering based on the principle of solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for one or two questions. The next one is Ajit from United News of India. Ajit, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I just wanted to know that what is WHO's view regarding India's testing? Some people say that testings are below the level what it should be. So what's WHO's view?
I can start, and perhaps Mike or Dee, you would like to supplement. I mean, I think the question is specifically on India, but I think we need to make very clear what our goal is for testing globally. Our goal for testing is to find the virus, and it's to find people who have been infected with the virus. And through the active case finding, so aggressively looking for people who are suspect to have COVID-19, and we have case definitions that describe who those people might be. If we test those individuals and know if they have the virus, then they can be isolated and cared for depending on the severity of the disease that they have. And that's very important that we have early clinical care and we have early isolation of those individuals so that we prevent the onward transmission. Testing also helps us to identify those cases and then contacts. So if we find contacts of the confirmed cases, then we can quarantine them. We can isolate them as well away from individuals and prevent them from passing it to someone else. These are critical to the goal of suppressing transmission. There's been some confusion that when we have said test, that means to test everyone in the population. That's never what that meant. That meant to have aggressive case finding, test all suspect cases, and test the contacts who develop symptoms. And that's really important. And we get a lot of questions of saying, what does that mean? You know, how many should we actually test? And it's difficult to say based on the population. It's based on the transmission scenario that a country is in. What we've tried to do to support countries is to provide a testing strategy and help you, depending on where you are. If you have clusters of cases or community transmission, how can you prioritize your testing should you have a limit in the number of tests you have or the supplies necessary to carry out that testing? So just to be clear, we recommend that all countries test suspect cases and test the contacts who develop symptoms. And again, that will depend on what's happening in your country, depending on the transmission scenario that you're in at the lowest administrative level.
Thank you. Let's go now to Jim Roop from Westwood One. Jim, can you hear us? Can you unmute yourself so then we will be able to hear you?
Yes, there we go. I apologize, Tarek.
No problems. Please go ahead.
Thank you all very much. You guys are rock stars. Not just you three, but I mean Tarek and Chris too. Awesome for bringing this to us. Thank you very much. My question comes in recovery numbers. We don't seem to get those. And it's my understanding that if someone is considered no longer infectious, they must have had a test. So are not those who were positive now negative, aren't those numbers collected so that we know the legitimate number of recovered people?
So I'll start with that. Jim, thank you for thanking others. I think, you know, you see the three of us up here every day, but we represent a huge number of people, and thanks for saying that publicly, because we are very grateful for everybody at WHO and beyond that is working on this pandemic. With regards to recoveries, this is a very, very important question. It is important. I'm surprised more people don't actually ask us about the recoveries, because there are a large number of people who have recovered from this. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's in the hundreds of thousands of people, if not over 1 million people so far, that have recovered from infection. When someone is discharged from hospital or discharged from home isolation, typically there's different ways that that's done depending on the country. Our recommendation is that somebody has 2 negative PCR tests at least 24 hours apart, and that they've clinically recovered. They have no more symptoms. In situations where testing is limited, what we recommend is that individuals who are either suspected to have it or who have tested positive at least once, that they recover in terms of their clinical symptoms, and they stay home an additional 2 weeks. What we're working on with our clinical network is following those individuals who have recovered to trace them over time and see how they're doing. And see if there's any long-term effect from infection. And I think this is a really important aspect as we go through this pandemic. Just because you've had the disease and you've recovered, most people will recover and be totally fine. Some people will have some lingering effects, and it's important for us to document this very carefully. We're also following people over time to really understand the level of protection that they have from another infection. And we've talked about this at other press conferences before, but that will take some time, because we need to follow individuals over weeks and months to measure the level of antibodies, and this is the immune response that the body has after infection. And it will take us some time to really understand if they have protection, how strong that protection is, and for how long that protection will last.
Thank you very much, and thank you for nice words. Maybe the last question for tonight, Imogen from BBC. Imogen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's coming back to the question of children and whether they can actually infect other people. Because we heard here in Switzerland, and I'm getting a lot of questions from people all over the world, that grandparents were advised this week, actually it's okay, you can hug your grandchildren if you want to. I just wonder, could you clarify the evidence about children being able to spread or not virus?
So thanks for that question. I'm sure many grandparents around the world are dying to hug their children, grandchildren. This is one of the living reviews that we're currently working on. We're tracking all studies that are evaluating this infection in children. Consistently, what we're seeing across countries that are dealing with COVID-19 is that children seem to be less affected. And as Mike said earlier, overwhelmingly, a majority of children who are infected and detected through surveillance systems have mild disease and recover. And that's important. We do know from some household transmission studies where you follow household members very carefully over a period of time and you test them, that we've seen transmission from adults to children. And we have also seen transmission to a much lesser extent from children to adults. There's no reason to think that children are less susceptible to infection if they're exposed, and that they can transmit. So it's certainly possible, but we're really not seeing this in the epidemiology. We need a lot more research and very detailed studies. It can't come from individual case reports. It has to come from studies that follow people over time to really better understand what role children are playing. We'll also learn from the seroepidemiology studies, which include children, if they are infected and they're not developing disease. And so that's something that we don't know yet, but we are in the 90 studies that I mentioned, many of those will be looking at seroprevalence in children.
Sorry, just add that, and I think Maria spot on there, and I think we also need to look at with children, and if children are getting infected without developing clinical disease, they may also be less infectious if they're not coughing and hacking and sneezing. And part of this may also, we need to look across this whole epidemic at infectious dose. and we need to look at how people are infected, because we're sometimes making assumptions that because someone is asymptomatic, they're probably spreading all of the disease. Well, it may not be the case. We need to look at how people are symptomatic through the course of disease, how much virus they're potentially expelling through coughing, through sneezing, through contaminating their hands, the environment, and other issues. We also need to look at severity of disease in relation to the exposure dose. What the type of exposure, the dose of exposure, does that relate to severity of disease? There's a lot of issues that are going to have to be worked out as we continue to learn more about this virus.
Thank you very much. Before we conclude this, I think Dr. Ryan would like to have a few words.
Yeah, no, I just want to, before we finish, say happy birthday to the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, GORN. I wear 2 lanyards every day of my working life, which seems to be every day now. My WHO one and my GORN one. To say to our colleagues in GORN, like you, I am GORN. A group that came together 20 years ago in this room and agreed that no one institution in the world has all of the capacity to deal with epidemics. That we were stronger together and we could find solutions together. GORN was set up on 12 guiding principles, has never had a bureaucracy, a theocracy, a constitution or law to underpin it. What it has had is a tribe of committed, very different organisations. Our colleagues at CDC in Atlanta, our colleagues at MSF, our colleagues at UNICEF, our colleagues in small and large scientific institutions, the Robert Koch Institute, Singapore, Korea, China, so many institutions from around the world, and with one thing in mind, to come together to serve humanity, to serve those communities who are facing the terror of epidemics. And so many people in this network have put their own lives on the line again and again in the service of humanity. So happy birthday, GORN. I'm proud to be GORN.
Yeah, I would like to join Mike in saying happy birthday to GORN and appreciation to all what you're doing, all members of GORN, and my special thanks especially to its chair, Dr. Dale Fisher from Singapore, and all members of the committee and also all members of GORN. And look forward to fighting this pandemic, to continue the fight together and bring it to an end. Thank you and happy birthday, GORN.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, so see you on Friday. Thank you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, DG. And we will have an audio file being sent to you soon, and transcript will be available tomorrow. Wish you a very nice evening, everyone, from Geneva.